What's going on, guys? Tyler from Audioholics Unite here, and today I am going to be doing a wrong opinion on Dream Theater. Now, Dream Theater is a band that for the longest time I couldn't get into, mostly because I was never into long songs. I never really liked prog. I was kind of just unenlightened in a lot of ways to how good prog music can be. And one day I heard the song Panic Attack, and it blew me away. I loved it. And so I was like, hey, where should I start with Dream Theater? And people said start with Images and Words, which was a mistake. And then I decided, well, you know what, I was just going to listen to the album that, Panic Attack was off of. So I went to Octavarium. And it was a good album, and I felt there was something with Dream Theater that I could get out of the band, but it wasn't clicking with me yet. And eventually I went ahead and listened to Train of Thought, which is going to be the album that actually did get me into Dream Theater. As someone who is a fan of heavy music, it's that album that just clicked with me, and I love every song on it. And we'll get to where I put it in the tier later, but yeah, so from then on I listened to a few other albums, and eventually I realized there were a lot of Dream Theater albums that I didn't really listen to, that I haven't heard before, and that's what motivated me to do this video. I went ahead and listened to every single album in Dream Theater's discography, and here I am. I'm ready to rank them, so let's go ahead and get into it. So the first album I'm going to be talking about is Falling Into Infinity, which I'm going to place in the D category because I don't think that Dream Theater has ever made what I could truly call a bad album, right? Now, with this album, though I may say it's not bad, I can't really claim to enjoy it much. I was halfway through and practically begging for it to be over. This album commits the major sin of being boring as hell. It has a plethora of major issues other than that, though. Mixing and production could be a whole lot better. The tone on the guitar as well as the keyboard on this album could be way better also. The songwriting is just not very good. It's very mediocre. Songs like Peruvian Skies and Burning My Soul have slivers of greatness, but overall I would say the album is mediocre. It's gotten a decent amount of hate through the fan base, so I don't think this is a very controversial opinion. But the prog venture of this album, The Trial of Tears, isn't really one of my favorite Dream Theater songs. I don't really like it very much. It's all right, but like this entire album, it has slivers of greatness, but it never really gets to that level consistently. And so I rank it a 6 out of 10. The next album I'm going to be talking about is going to be When Dream and Day Unite. Now, this is an album that I think is a lot better than people make it out to be, okay? It is, just give me a second, I need to make sure I'm recording. Okay. See, basically the last time I did this, it didn't record, so I sat here and talked about all of the albums without checking to make sure it's recording, and as a result of that, it never started recording. So, I just wanted to check and make sure so I didn't do that again. I'm glad it's working this time. Anyway, When Dream and Day Unite. This is not as bad as an album as people make it out to be. It's got some really good music on it. I think people don't give it a fair shake because it is the only album to not feature James LaBrie on vocals, and that's just weird. But it is a good album on its own merit, and I think if you listen to it as an album on its own, disconnected from the rest of Dream Theater's discography, then I think you will find things to enjoy about it just like I did. The YTSC Jam or Yitzy Jam or however you pronounce it, that is a really good instrumental and one of my favorites. You know, The Killing Hand has a really cool concept behind it, and it's a really nice song. Status Seeker is probably my favorite song on the album. I love the chorus in that song. This album has a lot to like. It's not a great album, that's for sure. It has flaws, and the biggest one I'd throw at it is that it kind of just feels like a band on their amateur stages. It feels like a band who hasn't really found their sound yet. And even given its own merits, that's an issue. I think as a result of that, the songwriting just kind of feels a bit off, and the whole thing feels a little sloppy because, like I said, the band was just figuring out their sound. It also drags a little bit in places, though that is a major criticism. This is still a really good album. It's not a masterpiece, but I would at least give it a 6.5 out of 10. All right, that brings us to the astonishing. All right, a lot of people hate this album. I don't hate this album. I don't think I hate any Dream Theater album except for maybe Falling Into Infinity, but even that album, there are songs on it I like. Every other album in Dream Theater's discography I don't hate. I don't even dislike any of them. This is a 2.5-hour record, though. So given that it's 2.5 hours long, it's got to hold your attention for that entire time, and I don't think it succeeds in doing that. Given how long it is, 2.5 hours, I'm going to keep saying that, more than half of the damn thing should not be wispy Labrie ballads. Listen, I listened to every single Dream Theater album, and after listening to all of them, I can tell you, I am sick to death of Labrie ballads. There are so many of them, and I don't think even half of them are good, and especially on this record. Given how many songs there are, I probably would skip half of this album if I were to re-listen to it, because I already know the story. I listened the whole thing through once. That said, the ballads are mostly forgivable in the context of the story, but as a record sonically, and especially as a Dream Theater album, it just fails to reach the heights that it probably should as a 2.5-hour record. All that said, although I do think it is far too long, 2.5 hours, I did actually somewhat enjoy my time with it. It even has a few tracks that are top-shelf prog rock. If you go into this album with an open mind and you suspend your disbelief a bit with the story, then I think you will enjoy it as well. Listen, I'm not going to go into the story. I'm not going to go into the story for Scenes of a Memory either, but I'll tell you it is really fucking stupid. In my opinion, it's a stupid story. And the names in the story are equally as stupid. The villain of the story is literally named Nefarious. Yes, Nefarious. But it's spelled Nafaruyus because Dream Theater thinks they're being clever, I think. They're not. They're not being clever at all. And the absence of Mike Portnoy, which we'll get into a little bit later, is a little bit more... You can feel it a lot more on this record. Mike Portnoy was a huge songwriter in previous records, like Scenes of a Memory, and you can really tell that he didn't have anything to do with it because, well, he left the band by this point. And that's unfortunate because it means the writing goes downhill a little bit. I mean, say what you will about old Mike. He had a lot to do with the songwriting quality in previous Dream Theater records, and I think all of them after he's left have noticeably gotten worse, in my opinion. At least lyrically. Because John Petrucci is as much of a genius songwriter as he is not a brilliant lyricist. Mike Portnoy was a very, very good lyricist. And often together, they would make amazing music. And I'm not saying the music after Mike Portnoy left isn't amazing. I'm not even saying The Astonishing doesn't have amazing moments. There are moments on here that gave me chills, like The Path That Divides and 3 Days. But, as I said, you can feel that the lyricism just isn't up to snuff with where it should be for an album like this. Overall, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. It was an ambitious project, and I respect Dream Theater for trying it. I would say never do it again, but it's an album I think every Dream Theater fan should at least listen to once. If you're new to Dream Theater, do not start with this album. Do not. Ever. You will be put off the band for the rest of your life. But yeah, so that'll lead me into my next album, which is going to be a dramatic turn of events. Now, this is an album that very well may grow on me with repeat listens, and I will listen to it more because there are enough songs on it that I want to come back to. But I have a few problems with it that make me put it as low as it is. For one, the mix really could be a lot better. I don't love the mix on this album. I mean, listen, I'm not an audio engineer, but I've listened to enough albums where I feel comfortable talking about mixing and mastering, and I feel like the mix on this album is really bad. The drums don't feel as up in center as they have been on a good deal of previous Dream Theater records, which is an observation I didn't make myself, but one that I fully agree with. I wonder if the reason they did that was because they were a little bit unconfident in Mike Mangini's abilities in the studio. As I said before, Mike Portnoy was a huge songwriting force in the band, and this is the first album without Mike Portnoy. So now that Mike Mangini's here, I mean, he had almost nothing to do with the songwriting. And because of that, you can really feel a noticeable drop in quality in the songwriting. I'm sorry to say that, but I genuinely believe it. It's just not as good, in my opinion. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about the whole Mike Mangini versus Mike Portnoy thing. So, if for those of you who don't know, Mike Portnoy was the drummer of the band previous to this album, and he left because he felt that Dream Theater needed to take a break, and the rest of the band didn't agree. They replaced Mike Portnoy with Mike Mangini. Now, there are a lot of theories about stuff going on behind the scenes, like maybe Mayung, or however you pronounce his name, did not get along with Mike Portnoy, which would make sense. The more credible explanation I've heard is that James Labrie and Mike Portnoy did not get along and never have, and they just had a huge falling out where Mike just had to leave the band and he couldn't stay in it. And Labrie wasn't going to be fired, so the band basically was like, okay, bye, Portnoy. And there is some evidence to this fact. In later years, Labrie has come out and basically openly stated how much he hates Portnoy. I mean, not exactly. He hasn't said, I hate Mike Portnoy, but if you read interviews and you know how to read in between the lines, you can elaborate. I don't know if that's what happened. I know that what they say is that Mike Portnoy wanted a break. Nobody else wanted a break, and he decided to leave because of that. Is what it is. The fact is, Mike Portnoy left the band, and now we have Mike Mangini, and one way or another, that's what we're here. That's where we are. And because of that, I feel like this album especially, Dream Theater felt like they needed to prove something after Mike Portnoy left. And so, like, a good example of that, the first track is almost a one-on-one remake of Pull Me Under, down to having the same structures and even the same keys, which is a little weird. But I will say I do think On the Backs of Angels is a fair amount better than Pull Me Under. But because of this, like, need to prove themselves, the album feels inauthentic to me. I mean, you have to understand, I went through and listened to every single one of these albums back to back within the course of a few days. And going through all of these albums with Portnoy to suddenly no Portnoy, it was a bit of a shift for me that I needed to get used to, but I was on board initially. You might think I was being biased, but that's not at all what happened. I listened to this album and I'd heard people didn't like it as much. And I even texted Logan at the time and said, I don't see it. This sounds amazing so far. I loved the first track. And the second track might not have been as good, but it was still really good. It's after that point where the album started to drop for me. Lost Not Forgotten was a good song, but ironically, even after just listening to the song, it went through one ear and out the other and I forgot it. Not memorable at all. This Is the Life is even worse because I don't even think it's all that great a song, and it was very unmemorable as well. Bridges in the Sky, however, I know a lot of people don't like that song, but to me it was a fantastic song. Honestly, the best song on the album, in my opinion. Heavy and complex riffing, great melodies and vocals. What's not to love about it? It also has a really awesome intro with low guttural singing. This is a really great song. Outcry is another pretty good song, but I'd say it's maybe on par with Lost Not Forgotten. It's not great. Far From Heaven is another forgettable Dream Theater ballad, and it's even worse than some of the ones on The Astonishing. Breaking All Illusions is a really good song, but it's just not as good as Bridges in the Sky. And the last song is yet another forgettable Dream Theater ballad. There was already one of those on the album, but here's another one because, of course. Overall, it's a decent album, but it has its problems. I would give it a solid 7 out of 10. So you're asking, I can hear you. Well, why'd you give The Astonishing and Dramatic Turns of Events a 7 out of 10, but you put Dramatic Turn of Events above The Astonishing? I'll tell you why. The Astonishing is a 2.5-hour record. I will 100% come back and listen to this album over that album any fucking day of the week, because I have like an hour and some minutes, however long the Dramatic Turn of Events is, to listen to an album, but I don't always have 2.5 hours. So that's why it's where it is. Oh, and also, frankly, On the Backs of Angels is better than any song on The Astonishing. Fight me. Okay, that brings us to the truly controversial pick, Images and Words, which is also going in the C category. Yeah, this is the one that's going to get me set on fire. Well, there's another one that'll probably get me set on fire more later, but we'll get to it. This is an incredible album. Okay, it's a really good album. Objectively, I would say there's probably not a subpar track on here. It has some amazing songwriting. It's a classic, but personally, it just doesn't have much for me to dig my teeth into that I can return to that I like. You know, I originally wrote like 5 paragraphs trying to justify my opinion on this album, but you know what? Because I am reading off of like a light script. It's not like a word-for-word script. It just has bullet points so that I can like have an idea of what to talk about with each album. And I wrote so much here trying to defend my opinion, and you know what? I don't have to defend my opinion. Okay? It just doesn't click with me. All right? I've wanted to love this album. I've listened to this album so many times. Probably more times than any other album in Dream Theater's discography, and I've never enjoyed it. I have never really liked that album. Maybe it is the peer pressure, everybody going on constantly about how fucking good it is, how much they love it. How? Listen to Another Day. Okay, listen to that fucking song. A friend of mine said it sounds like George Michael, and that is not a flattering comparison. It's just not good. It's not even like a case of not my cup of tea. I don't think it's good. And then you have a song like Wait for Sleep, which again is just another one of those songs that, yeah, Take the Time is all right. It's got like a Michael Jackson feel to it, but Metropolis Part 1 is obviously the best song on the album. Like, by far, by a mile. Probably the best song so far that we've talked about, period. Out of all of these albums, the 5 that we have listed so far. And honestly, Metropolis Part 1 is probably one of the best songs Dream Theater will or has ever written. But I don't care for most of the rest of the album. I like Pull Me Under, but I think there are songs better than Pull Me Under. Metropolis Part 1 is one of the best songs Dream Theater ever wrote. Take the Time's all right. Under a Glass Moon is second best on the album, but, I mean, it's not by a small margin. I would say, like, if Metropolis Part 1 is all the way up at S, I would say Under a Glass Moon's down at B. And, like, the rest of the songs differ from C to F in terms of personal preference. Like I said in the beginning, objectively, this is a great album. If you look at the music theory and you go through it and you're like, okay, well, yeah, objectively, it's fucking great. Okay, but preference-wise, this is not my preference. I don't want to come back to a lot of these songs over most of the rest of Dream Theater's discography. I'm sorry, but that's just my opinion. And if you don't like it, you don't have to like it. It's my video, in my opinion. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about it. The next band, or the next album, is going to be Black Clouds and Silver Linings. So there's a fair amount to say with this album. It's a really, really good record, okay? It's got some really great songs on it, like A Nightmare to Remember is one of my favorite Dream Theater tracks of all time. I love it. A Rite of Passage is also really, really good. Maybe not quite as good as A Nightmare to Remember, but fuck if that chorus isn't amazing. It gives me chills every time I hear it. Wither, on the other hand, who the fuck? Actually, I know John Petrucci wrote it. Why the fuck did you want to include this? Garbage. Wither is one of the worst songs I've ever heard from the band. I hate it. It's literally about nothing. It's literally about nothing. Why would you want to put a song on the album that is about literally nothing? It sounds like it's about nothing. I mean, there are songs that have been about nothing, like Bohemian Rhapsody, and they worked, but this one doesn't. It sounds bland. The chord progressions don't work for me. The lyricism is bad, in my opinion. I don't like it. I wither away listening to it. But after that, we have The Shattered Fortress, which is the last song on the 12-step suite, which was by Mike Portnoy. It's about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's one of my favorite parts of Dream Theater. I actually really like that. There's like a new one in every album. And The Shattered Fortress is one of the best in the suite. And it definitely ends the suite with a bang either way. This album also boasts The Best of Times and The Count of Tuscany, two songs that are really good, but I don't love them. They don't click with me all that much. And so this album, it's really good. It's really good. When it's good, it's really, really fucking good. Okay? But otherwise, it's kind of just a middle-of-the-road Dream Theater album for me. I mean, don't get me wrong. Songs like A Rite of Passage, The Best of Times, The Count of Tuscany, it's already better than the vast majority of music I listen to. It's already amazing. But in comparison to, like, the rest of Dream Theater's discography, this album's just an 8 out of 10 for me. So that brings us to Octavarium. Now, Octavarium is a really weird album for me. I was really struggling whether to put this above or below Black Clouds, but I think I've eventually decided to put it above because there are just more songs that I like on it. I think Black Clouds has probably better highs, like if we don't include the title track of Octavarium, the rest of the album, compared to the Black Clouds. I'd say the highs of Black Clouds are probably a little higher than anything on Octavarium. Like Panic Attack and Root of All Evil are probably the best songs on the album, again, other than the title track. And I don't think either of those songs are even close to being as good as A Nightmare to Remember. Although they are still phenomenal songs and definitely still top Dream Theater songs. Like, if I were ranking songs, they would be up here in the S category. I'm just saying Nightmare to Remember would be further up the S category. So, but, like, that's just one song from Black Clouds. For every good song on Black Clouds, I can name 2 from Octavarium. Nightmare to Remember, okay. Root of All Evil, Panic Attack. Rite of Passage, sure, no problem. Never Enough These Walls. You know, like, Octavarium has just better songs, in my opinion. Or I guess maybe not better, more of them. It has more good songs. The highs are higher on Black Clouds, but Octavarium just has more overall good songs. And for that reason, I come back to it more. That said, I also think the lows are lower with Octavarium. I mean, Wither was a bad song. I went on about how bad I think it is, but there are 2 songs on Octavarium that are just completely atrocious. The Answer Lies Within and I Walk Beside You sound like cut tracks from Images and Words, but cut because they fucking suck. Like, they're just not good. Okay? They're full of cheese, especially I Walk Beside You. God, that makes me want to fucking barf. I feel like I'm listening to the corniest fucking love story I've ever heard. It's like Romeo and Juliet, but somehow a billion times worse. And also way more corny. I just don't like it. It's too much cheese. I'm sorry. Some of you might like I Walk Beside You. I fucking hate it. So, because of that, there's 2 songs on the album I don't like. But other than that, you have, I mentioned earlier, Root of All Evil, Panic Attack, fucking amazing tracks. You got songs like These Walls and Sacrifice Sons, Never Enough. Awesome songs. This is a great album. But let's talk about the meat. the 24-minute epic Octavarium. Holy shit, is this song fucking amazing, guys. Okay? It's 24 minutes long, and as with any song this long, I have to ask, does it hold my attention for the entire 24 minutes? Do I get bored? Do I get distracted? And the answer with this one is no. Is it as good as A Change of Seasons, which we'll talk about in just a moment here? Is it as good as that? No, it's not. But it sure as hell is close to second, if not definitely second. Like, it's just so fucking good, guys. I can't even explain to you. You just need to go and listen to it. Like, even if you're not a fan of Dream Theater or music, go in and listen to fucking Octavarium, and it'll make you a fan of Dream Theater and or music, okay? And if it doesn't, I don't know what to tell you. You have a problem. You have a problem with your taste. You're the type of person who eats ketchup on ice cream. If you have any solid grasp of what is and isn't good, if you go and listen to Octavarium, it'll blow your mind. So overall, I give this album an 8.5 out of 10. And the reason it's getting 1.5 points subtracted is because of those two songs, I Walk Beside You and The Answer Lies Within. I don't like them. I think they're terrible. I'm not going to continue to rap on them, but that's why. And so that brings us to the next album, which is going to be very controversial, Distance Over Time. A lot of people, this album just didn't click with them, and I can understand why. I mean, but you got to look at it from the band's perspective, okay? They just came from the fucking astonishing, right? This 2.5-hour prog epic musical, okay? This is a serious undertaking, very ambitious project that they've just done. It probably took years and years of writing, even beyond the last album. They've probably been writing this and thinking about this for a long time. So they probably just wanted to go to something a little bit more simple. Yes, Distance Over Time is more, Dream Theater. Like, it's not a amazing prog epic like Scenes from a Memory or The Astonishing. It's not that ambitious. And sometimes that's okay. There's no Octavarium on it. It's just straight prog metal. And again, I think that's okay sometimes. Sometimes I don't want to sit down and listen to a 45-minute song and have my mind blown. Sometimes I just want to sit and listen to some cool fucking music with some odd time signatures, and that's what Distance Over Time gives you. This album I've come back to a hell of a lot more than the ones below it, and it just came out. So I would say that's a pretty good indicator of how much I'm going to like it in a year or two. So you're asking, why is it only in B then? Well, frankly, it just comes down to the fact that I think that the songs in the albums above it are better. I give this album an 8.5 out of 10. So that brings us to the next album, which is going to be A Change of Seasons. Now, whereas in the last album, we were talking about how the album is a little simpler, it's not as proggy, and I can enjoy that sometimes. Songs like At Wit's End, which are 9 minutes, more digestible. Songs like A Change of Seasons, I also sometimes are very in the mood for. 24-minute prog epics. And in the case of A Change of Seasons, this is, in my opinion, the best song that Dream Theater ever or will ever write. It is one of the best songs of all time, in fact. When people ask, name me one of your favorite songs, I don't know if I could say this is without a doubt my favorite song of all time, but it's certainly in my top 5, guys. And it's definitely my favorite, I think, top, objectively the best Dream Theater song. So it's where it is because of that. So you're asking, why isn't it higher? Well, if we were judging it based on the title track alone, A Change of Seasons, then it'd probably be number 1. It would be above everything else. But the fact is, it's an EP. And the rest of the album is full of live covers. I think they are good live covers, but the fact remains that they are live covers. They're not real songs. And so when you compare them to 6 albums that are full of real songs, it just falls short in my opinion. I almost didn't want to include it cuz it's not even fair, really. But God, that title track is just so good. I had to talk about it. And so for that title track alone, I give this album a 9 out of 10. And the only reason it's not a 10 out of 10 is because it's not really an album. It's an EP. Okay, so next we have Train of Thought. Alright, now Train of Thought is the album that got me into Dream Theater. Just give me one moment. Make sure I'm still recording. Okay, good. Train of Thought is the album that got me into Dream Theater, okay? If it weren't for this album, I never would have become a Dream Theater fan. This video would never have existed, okay? But I'm not going to sit here and say it's a perfect album. I can understand why people have problems with it. Namely, I think they implemented too much nu metal influence on this album. The rapping is really annoying. Granted, it doesn't happen too often, but when it does happen, it's obtrusive and it's annoying as hell. But outside of This Dying Soul, anyways, I think it's actually really well implemented in This Dying Soul. So in Honor Thy Father, especially, the rapping is very annoying. So let's go through the track listing, As I Am. That's probably the song that specifically got me into Dream Theater. I mean, other than Panic Attack. That is the song that made the whole thing just click for me. It's a great song. I can understand why some people are like, well, it's too much like Metallica. It sounds like Pantera. Like, okay, fine, but like, it's unique enough. It's not a ripoff or anything. Are you just mad that Petrucci is playing heavy riffs and Labrie goes, yeah, once or twice? Like, it's a good fucking song, okay? It's got some shredderific solo. It's fucking good, okay? And then you go on to This Dying Soul, which is another part of the 12-step suite and one of the better parts, once again. Really love that song. And then you have Endless Sacrifice, which is basically This Love by Pantera, but maybe a little more proggy, and the riffs are definitely far more tasty. I mean, seriously, guys, that riff at the end of the song, the like that riff, fucking amazing. Top 10 Petrucci riffs, hands down. Honor Thy Father is a fantastic song. The rapping is at its most annoying in this track, but it's just such a scathing, hatred-filled song that you can't help but love it. Especially at that breakdown when Labrie goes, don't cross the crooked step. Fuck yes. And also we have Vacant, which is essentially an intro to one of the best Dream Theater instrumentals, Stream of Consciousness. Hell yeah. I mean, how can you not like that? It's fucking amazing. I don't know if I talked about it earlier. I think I did. Yitzy Jam or YTSG Jam or whatever the fuck from When Dream and Day Unite. Right up there with Stream of Consciousness. And we'll later talk about Erotomania and The Dance of Eternity. Fucking Dream Theater instrumentals are amazing, but they were so good on Train of Thought. I love the instrumentals in Train of Thought. It's just, there is, but there isn't. So, like, I just wish there was more of a prog epic on this album than there is. Like, In the Name of God would be the prog venture that they took on this album, and it is a fantastic song. I love it. I just wish they did something more balls out. Like they made a 30-minute song or some shit like that on this album, because I love the sound of the album, and I would love to hear what they would do with a song that long. But, it's all right. It's all right. So, because of those reasons, I would give it a 9 out of 10. The only reason I'm taking a point off is because they did probably implement a little bit too much nu metal influence with the rapping, and it can get annoying at times. All right, so that brings us to my top 5 Dream Theater albums. And we're going to start the list off with Awake. I can understand why this album is a lot of people's number one, but for me, there is a flaw to it. That said, this album is a darker and more eerie version of Images and Words, and it's also a little bit more complex in my opinion, and that's why I prefer it to that album. The album opens with the killer 6 o'clock, and then we go into the heavy Caught in a Web. Both songs so far are complex prog epics, and the fantastic Innocence Faded continues that trend. Erotomania is probably the band's best instrumental, maybe just behind The Dance of Eternity. Or at least one of them. It definitely is one of the best. That leads into the epic Voices, which is just an amazing song, and from there we get to the only song I don't like, and the entire reason why there's half a point taken off here, The Silent Man. I don't like that song. I think it's out of place. I don't find it gripping. At least it does help with the flow of the album, and it does make for one of the most badass songs in DT's discography, an intro to that song, The Mirror. Fantastic song. Lie is also really damn good, and then we have Lifting Shadows Off a Dream, which is a nice song, but Scarred is really where it's at. Scarred is hands down the best song on the album, apart from the final track, Space Divest, which is frankly top 10 songs I have ever heard. It's so good. A Silent Man is just the only song on the album I don't enjoy, but it's only enough to take a half point off due to the fact that I do feel it does have a reason to exist as an intro and a bit of relief from the heaviness of this album. Okay, so the next place we have is Systematic Chaos. You're probably thinking, what the fuck? He put Systematic Chaos above Awake? Well, you can notice I still have Dream Theater's self-titled discography, so save your hatred for a minute because, you know, you're probably going to be more pissed about that. Honestly, this one is going to be controversial to some of you. In fact, some of you are going to consider this complete blasphemy, but like, I'm sorry, I really like this album. I was blown away by it when I first listened to it. I wasn't expecting to like it because The Dark Eternal Night is really fucking great, but I also heard, like, the intro track, The Presence of Enemies, and I wasn't entirely blown away by it, and so I kind of avoided this album for the longest time, but listening to it again, fuck, if I will come back to this album so much. You know, the one thing I will say is that there is a decent amount of vocal effects this time around, and that used to annoy me. It doesn't so much anymore, but it might annoy some of you. The opening track is the first part of one of Dream Theater's better suites, In the Presence of Enemies, and that's why I said initially I didn't like it as much. Well, now when you put it in the context of the whole album, it's so much fucking better to me, especially when you keep in mind part 2, which is fucking awesome. After that, we have Forsaken, which is a song I actually really love. And then we have Constant Motion, which is another completely fantastic song. After that, we have what is one of, if not the heaviest, songs Dream Theater's ever written, The Dark Eternal Night, which I mentioned earlier. Love that song. It's very Pantera-esque in its riffage. It is followed by my least favorite of the 12-step suite, and probably the worst song on the album, Repentance. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think it's a good song. I just think it's the worst of those tracks. I would also say, like I said, it's the weakest on the album. But it is still a good song, and I do actually enjoy it more than a lot of people. After that, we have The Monstrous Prophets of War, which is one of my favorite songs on the album. Really great. And then we go on to the last 2 songs, which are the prog epics of this one. The Ministry of Lost Souls and In the Presence of Enemies, part 2. Now, I can really see why some people would be putting this album right down with Black Clouds, because if those last 2 songs didn't click with you like they did me, then you probably wouldn't like this album as much. But, God, did they click with me. In the Ministry of Lost Souls is one of my favorite Dream Theater tracks. You know, the chorus is fantastic, the chord progressions are good, the melodies are good, but what really got me with this song is that some people have told me that the guitar is the closest instrument to expressing human emotion, and I do agree with that. If there was ever one song that could be used as evidence to prove that, this would be a good contender. Another good contender would be, you know, When My Guitar Gently Weeps by the Beatles, but this is a damn close contender, too. In the Presence of Enemies is also a fucking fantastic song. It's definitely the most proggy and mind-blowing song on the album. And due to the fact that I enjoy this album so much, you're probably wondering why it's only number 3. Well, honestly, it just comes down to the songs. I just prefer the songs on the top 3 Dream Theater albums to this one. That said, this is a textbook example of an all-killer, no-filler album for me. This is a 10 out of 10. The first one on the list. And the next one's going to be really controversial. The self-titled album. I didn't mean to put it there. Goes here. Okay. This is another one of those where I have a lot of paragraphs trying to, justify my opinion, but I'm just going to come out and say it. It is, without a doubt, one of Dream Theater's best albums. You know what? You take your fucking Octavarium and you shove it up your ass. Sometimes I am down for simpler songs. Okay, this is basically everything a dramatic turn of events wanted to be, but better. This is basically what Distance Over Time was trying to recreate. This is just a bunch of prog metal tracks. There's nothing ridiculously, conceptual or complicated about what it is. It's just, here's a bunch of prog songs. We haven't gotten that since, Awake, I'd say. It's been a long fucking time since we got something like that, where they haven't tried to do anything crazy with it, They made a conscious effort to write shorter songs, and I think that is what makes the album so digestible to me. But if you were missing the more complex, long-form, ambitious Dream Theater stuff, you have the last track, which is, in my opinion, one of the best long-form Dream Theater songs. I mean, how long is it? 21 minutes or something like that? It stands right up to Octavarium in my mind. I fucking love that song. It would go probably, Change of Seasons, Octavarium, and then probably Illusion Theory. I absolutely love that song. I mean, what's not to love about the track listing here? You have, the really cool intro track, and then you have The Enemy Inside, which is just fucking awesome. That main riff in the song, fucking gave me a hard-on, man. And then they started adding the notes, fucking yes. And then you have The Looking Glass, which is, although maybe not quite as good, it still holds up the standard of greatness that this album boasts overall. Enigma Machine is another one of those instrumentals that goes straight up there with, Stream of Consciousness, Yitzy Jam, Erotomania, and Dance of Eternity. It's one of the best. And it may actually trump The Enemy Inside because of that. Fantastic leads, heavy riffs. The song is just badass. The Bigger Picture is another fantastic song from a fantastic album, and the next song has a main riff which has instantly become one of my favorites, Behind the Veil. This song is right up there with everything else on this album. This is just straight up one of the most consistently great records the band ever made, and I don't understand how some of you can't appreciate that. I think, honestly, some Dream Theater fans are just so up their own ass that they can't enjoy something a little simpler, all right? I feel like half of you would scoff if I tried to put a Metallica album in front of you. Yeah, listen, this album may not be as complex as all the other ones, but I love that there is an album in Dream Theater's discography that has more consistent, regular heavy metal. Okay? I like that. I like that about this album. And yeah, I hear your complaints about the drum mixing, the snare drum. I get it. I honestly don't get bothered by it too much. I understand a lot of people really get bothered by it. I don't. A lot of people rack on Mike Mangini's drumming on this album. Listen, Mike Portnoy is gone. Get over it. We have Mangini now. There is no reason to continually bitch. Oh, this should have been Mike Portnoy. If it was Mike Portnoy, this would have been so much better. Well, it's fucking not Mike Portnoy, and it will never be Mike Portnoy again. If you're just going to sit here and continue to bitch about it, stop listening to Dream Theater records. Just stay in your fucking bubble listening to Scenes of a Memory and Images and Words for the rest of your life. You can do that. Nobody is stopping you. there are some valid complaints. I think Mangini has sometimes a little bit too robotic precision when it comes to his drumming patterns. I think he doesn't play with, I don't know if I would say feel is the issue, but I think Portnoy supported some of the other instrumentalists a little bit better. Like in some John Petrucci solos, I think that Mike Portnoy better supported him than Mangini does. And, you can wage all of those criticisms, and those are fair criticisms, but stop sitting there and going, well, if it was Portnoy, he would have been. It's not Portnoy. It'll never be Portnoy again. I'm done ranting about it. I think this album just gets a lot of hate from fans who are mad that it's not another ambitious attempt to write a 30-minute song like Octavarium or Change of Seasons. They're mad that it's not like complex prog epics like Awake or, later songs that later albums we'll talk about. And like, I understand that, but I just fundamentally disagree that that's what makes Dream Theater good. Yeah, Dream Theater is great when it comes to being amazingly progressive and writing long songs. Really what it comes down to is Dream Theater are really good at songwriting. And when you put them in a room and say, hey, you need to create simple, shorter songs, you put them in that box. You make them uncomfortable. They're so used to writing these 24-minute prog epics. I think when you do that, greatness comes out. And that's why Dream Theater's self-titled album is so good. Okay? So I've rambled on a little bit and when it comes to this album, but really what it comes down to is just I think the songs are just so good. All right. That brings us to number 2, Metropolis, Part 2, Scenes of a Memory. Now, obviously, I love this album. I don't feel like I need to talk about the story much because if you don't know the story, then you need to listen to this album yourself. And I don't want to spoil it. The music is memorable, heavy, and brilliantly composed. The only problem I have is that, like, sonically, you can't really listen to this album on its own. You have to listen to it all together in one sitting. This is basically everything The Astonishing should have been for 2.5 hours, compressed into 1 hour and like 40 minutes, I think, something like that. This album is amazing just on its own merits. You don't have to have an amazing story. It focuses on the music first. We are going to write amazing riffs, chord progressions, melodies first, and then we will focus on writing good story. The Astonishing, it was the other way around. We want to write a good story, and the music comes second. That was a huge reason why The Astonishing wasn't as good, in my view, and Scenes of a Memory is so much better. I mean, what can I say about this album that you haven't heard 300,000 times? Overture, fucking amazing. It's got really cool riffs. Dance of Eternity has thousands of time signature changes. It's fucking great. Like, Spirit Goes On. It's a Dream Theater anthem. They've said it themselves. They play it in like every live show. It's a great song. What's to say about this album that hasn't been said 300 times? It's fucking great. It's one of the best concept albums of all time. Maybe the best concept album of all time. Definitely the best concept album that tells a story that I have ever personally heard, seen, or read about. It's just phenomenal, guys. 10 out of 10. Hands down. Now, the next album, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, is going to be my number 1 on my Dream Theater ranking. Now, you're probably wondering how I had so much praise for the last album and the album before. Why is this one above both of them? Well, frankly, it really clicks with me on a personal level. You start the album with The Glass Prison, which is the first song in the 12-step suite by Mike Portnoy, and in my opinion, the best one. It's fucking great. I love it. And then after that, you have Blind Faith, which is a really great song that ramps up with a badass chorus riff. Misunderstood is a masterwork and stands toe-to-toe with songs like Space Divest. The Great Debate is fantastic as well. I love the part where Labrie is going in one of the choruses, like, are you justified in taking life to save life? I love that chorus. It's really good. The whole song presents the stem cell research debate objectively, and I think in a very flavorful way. Disappear is a song I don't really love, but it's really, really good nonetheless. I would probably, that's the worst song on the album, and if I were being honest, I would say it's probably the worst song of the top 3 albums. But the reason why this takes place in top spot is because of the title track, the 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, which I could consider a track on its own, but I kind of don't, because in the album it's split up into a bunch of tracks. If I were to do that, then Scenes of a Memory would be its own songs too, because all of those are split up into tracks. So I feel like that's not fair. So, but either way, that part of the album where they start talking about 6 characters with mental illnesses, it just speaks to me on a personal level, because I know a lot of people who are mentally ill. I've known a lot of people with those mental illnesses. And me personally, I'm autistic. So Solitary Shell really speaks to me. This is the only album in Dream Theater's discography that brought me really close to tears, because it moved me so much. I have a personal connection to this album now, to the point where it's not just my favorite Dream Theater record, it's possibly my favorite record of all time. I mean, it's really hard for me to decide what my favorite record of all time is, because if I were to give you a list of my favorite records that could be a contender for number 1, there'd be over 50 of them, and it's hard for me to just pick which ones I like, because I like them all. But if there ever was a contender for that number 1 spot, it would definitely be this one. It'd be at least within the top 2 contenders out of that 50. I don't know what the other one would even be to beat it, so maybe I will just say it's my favorite record of all time, starting today. It's just an album that's so personally important to me now. Now that I've listened to it, and I've heard it all the way through. This was actually an album I hadn't heard before. I went to listen to all the albums to do this video. Since I listened to it that initial time, I've heard it like 3 times, and I'll hear it a lot more, because it has instantly just spoken to me on a level that no other album on this list has. So even if the entire first half of the record, just taking away the 42-minute song 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, even if all those songs were garbage, this would still be my top place probably, because of how good I think it is. It is, without a doubt, the best double LP I've ever heard, for sure. Because it is a double LP. You have the first side and then you have the second side. The best one I've ever heard, most likely. I don't know if you can consider Scenes of a Memory a double LP, but if you did, then that would be a contender, but I still think 6 Degrees is better. So, even if just a little bit better, it's just, like I said, it's just personal to me, and that's why it has to take the number 1 spot for me. So, that has been my Dream Theater list, and I would like to hear if you guys disagree. Do you have a different number 1 spot? Is Images and Words in number 1 and 6 Degrees down here in the D or even F category? Do you hate the Dream Theater self-titled record? If so, why? I mean, given it's not something I already talked about, maybe you have a reason why Mike Mangini is far worse than Portnoy. I mean, whatever you want to talk about. Let's talk about Dream Theater. And if someone who watches this wants Logan to do a similar ranking video, let's get him to listen to all the Dream Theater records, because he's only listened to a few of them. He's not really a huge fan of Dream Theater, so it'd be kind of cool to get his perspective on a band that I now love. All right. Well, see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.